here's where the tension shows up at this point. Now, even when there's structure in place, even when ownership is actually clarified, there's still a tendency for us to step back in, for you to fix and for you to answer first and for you to rescue early. And before long, what ends up happening is the practice quietly starts relying on you again. This is exhausting, folks. And that's exactly what today's episode is about. Not about new systems and not about new dashboards, but how do you actually behave once the structure exists inside of your practice? Now, if you take one thing from today's episode, please let it be this. Pause, run the filter, diagnose the signal, and then reinforce the structure. Do that consistently, and the practice is going to stop pulling back to you, okay? Stop pulling you back to the center. Folks, this is really, really important. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast, the podcast where I have the pleasure of simplifying the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your impact, your income, and your enjoyment in practice too. Now, over the last few weeks, we've been on a really intentional leadership journey, okay? Not about how to work harder and not about how to add more systems into your practice, but how to build a practice that doesn't rely on you carrying everything in your head. Now, we started with a CEO check-in, okay? This was about creating space, okay, for you to think instead of space for you to do. We moved into the CEO transition, okay, and recognized here how easy it is for us to become the bottleneck that prevents growth in our own practice, okay? We unpacked decision fatigue. This is important, okay, and why it's the repeated decisions, okay, not actually the workload that's exhausting you, okay? Now, then we built ownership and structure. Okay, now we did this so decisions have a home and standards can hold without you needing to hover. Now, all of this has been about solving one core problem, and that is no time, or said another way, no freedom. Now, the kind of practice that we're trying to steer away from is one where you can't take a proper holiday, one where stepping away feels risky, where growth feels heavy, where employing staff doesn't feel like it's going to lighten the load. It actually feels like it's going to increase it, okay? This is what we've been dismantling over the past few weeks. But here's where the tension shows up at this point. Now, even when there's structure in place, even when ownership is actually clarified, there's still a tendency for us to step back in, for you to fix and for you to answer first and for you to rescue early. And before long, what ends up happening is the practice quietly starts relying on you again. And this is exhausting, folks. And that's exactly what today's episode is about. Not about new systems and not about new dashboards, but how do you actually behave once the structure exists inside of your practice? Now, important. Most chiropractors don't consciously decide to take back control. It sounds more like this. You'll hear yourself saying, I'm just going to fix this once. It ends up feeling responsible, it feels efficient on your behalf, and it feels very often like leadership, okay? You'll notice that something is slightly off, a follow-up maybe wasn't perfect, maybe stock wasn't checked or ordered, maybe a conversation didn't land the way that you would have done it as well, and so what ends up happening is that you step in. Now, probably not because you crave control, but because you care, and because here's what's quietly happening, okay, in this situation. The system doesn't end up learning, the team doesn't grow, and the practice is reminded, okay, that when something really matters, it ends up coming back to you. And that's the last thing that you want to train your staff to do, okay? Leadership maturity requires something counterintuitive, okay? And it's the discipline to pause. I'll say that again. Leadership maturity requires something counterintuitive, and that is the discipline to pause. Now, I don't mean ignore or neglect. I mean just pause. Because every time you fix something immediately, what you're doing is you're training your staff on dependence on you. Every time you hold back just long enough though, okay, what you're doing is you're training capacity, all right? So why is it that stepping back feels so hard? First is we just need to acknowledge this. If stepping back were easy, you would already be doing it, okay? Stepping back doesn't just test your systems, okay? It tests your identity, okay? Most chiropractors listening to this are high performers, okay? That's why you listen to a podcast on this stuff. You built your practice through effort, through care, and through personal responsibility. And when something mattered, what ends up happening is you handle it. And when something slipped, you caught it as well. Now, that wiring, though, doesn't disappear just because you built structure. So when something wobbles, your brain, okay, doesn't calmly evaluate it. What ends up happening is your brain reacts. And underneath this reaction are a few very human drivers. And the first is responsibility, okay? You genuinely care about your patients and about the practice. You don't want somebody falling through the cracks. You don't want standards dropping on your watch. So that alarm and stepping into solving that alarm feels noble. And it is, okay? But noble instincts can often create unhealthy patterns if they're not regulated. Now, the second thing that comes up with here, or reason that we step into this, is because of competence, okay? And this simply is you know how to fix it quickly. You can solve it faster than explaining it. You can execute it in a cleaner way than somebody else needing to actually learn. But efficiency, while it feels good, okay, efficiency in the short term can sabotage capacity in the long term, okay? Now, the third one, and this is way more subtle, is being needed, okay? Or being needed feels validating is probably a better way for me to say it, okay? When everything roots back to you, you feel central, you feel important, and you feel indispensable. You feel like the boss. And this can feel nice as well. But most of us don't consciously admit that we like that feeling, okay? But if you strip it back far enough, being needed reassures that you matter. And the danger is this. When your identity is wrapped up in being the safety net, then stepping back can feel like losing significance. All right. And we don't want that. So when something goes slightly wrong, stepping in doesn't just fixes the problem. Okay. What it does is it restores your sense of control. It reduces your anxiety. It reinforces your role as the one who holds it all together. And that is why this is so hard. Because when you choose not to step in immediately, you're not just tolerating operational discomfort, you're tolerating identity discomfort. Okay. And this is way more difficult. You're allowing yourself not to be the hero in that moment, and that takes real maturity. So here's the reframe I want you to think about. Discomfort is not the danger. That wobble you feel, okay, and you don't intervene, that's not a collapse, okay? That's development, okay? Now, often when you step in quickly, you're not protecting the practice. What you're doing is you're relieving your own discomfort. Leadership maturity is the ability to notice that urge and then to pause anyway, not because you care less, okay, but because you care about the long-term freedom even more. And that pause, when it's repeated consistently, is what allows structure to strengthen instead of staying fragile, okay? So let's go through some practical examples, all right? Because before you want to step in, there's a few things we need to do. And there's 3 questions here, okay? We want to pause and ask these 3 questions. The first is this question, is it dangerous or is it just uncomfortable? Now, if it's genuinely unsafe or unethical, then we need to act immediately, okay? But most of the time, it's just discomfort, okay? The second question that we want to ask ourselves when we notice that things are slipping is, has the structure had a fair chance to work? This is where real leadership actually happens, because this is the moment where most chiropractors either micromanage or mature, all right? Now, checking whether structure has had a chance to work is not the same as checking whether somebody has failed. It's not, why didn't this happen? It's help me understand what our process is here. Okay. If you want to assess without blame, you need to shift from outcome focused to process focused questions. Folks, this is really, really important. So instead of, you were supposed to call them, try something like this. Can you walk me through what normally happens when somebody misses a visit? Instead of, why didn't this get ordered? Try something like this. What's our agreed trigger for reordering stock? Now, here are a few powerful self-diagnostic questions, okay? Some things that you can pop into your pocket for when these situations come up. What's the standard that we agreed on for this? When does this normally get handled? Who owns this outcome? Has enough time passed for this process to run its course? Now, notice the tone of these questions. They're not hunting for fault. You're mapping out the actual system. And when you listen carefully, you'll usually hear the answers to these questions are going to give you one of 4 signals. Okay, it's important for you to listen to these 4 signals because they help you diagnose what's going on and correcting the problem. Now, signal number 1 is a signal about a missing trigger. Okay, you're going to hear your staff say something like this: "Oh, I forgot." Now, that's really a motivation problem. It's a missing cue or a reminder. So when a staff member says, "Oh, I forgot to do that," that's got to do with the trigger. All right, now signal number 2 for you to listen for is unclear ownership. And in this situation, they might say something like this: "I didn't realize that that was mine." Okay, in this situation, ownership was assumed and not assigned. So we'd want to clean that up. Now, signal number 3 is an unclear standard. I thought we were okay. This means that the threshold, wasn't visible or specific. Now, signal number 4 that you'll get from these questions is a capacity constraint. I didn't get to it. I was too busy. And in this situation, you're not dealing with clarity. You're dealing with workload. So you want to listen out for each of those signals as well. Now, here's the subtle but really critical part. If you enter this conversation tense, sharp, or already convinced that something is broken, even good questions are going to feel accusatory, okay? So the sequence matters. Pause, regulate, then inquire, okay? When something slips, you're not asking who messed this up. You're asking, what is the structure showing me right now, okay? Now, the third question that we want to get to with this, is if I step in right now, what am I teaching the system? Am I reinforcing ownership or am I reinforcing dependence? Now, the goal here is not to never step in, but it's only to step back into the structure, not replace it. Instead of, "I'll handle this," what we want to come back to is our questions like beforehand. What does the process say? That's leadership. Now, that little section there, you might have to listen to a couple of different times so you can grind that in, because the last thing we want to get into is micromanaging or accusatory tone inside of this, because that will cut the whole culture of your practice. All right. So let me give you a couple of real world examples for this. Let's start with missed visits. Okay. So you notice that 2 patients weren't contacted and rebooked as well. The urge might be for you to manage it. You're going to pause. You're going to regulate, and then you're going to inquire. Now, instead of saying, were these followed up, you might say something like this: "I noticed that we've got 2 missed visits from yesterday still open. How are we tracking those at the moment?" Okay. And now you're listening, because maybe your CA says, "Oh, I meant to call them at the end of the day, but I got busy and I forgot." So we could follow up here with something like, what's our agreed time frame with follow-ups? Where does that usually get tracked? And is there a reminder built into the end of the day routine? Now, notice what you're doing here is you're not correcting, you're clarifying the system, okay? In this situation, the signal is a missed trigger. So you respond structurally. Okay, so let's add missed visits to the closing checklist so they're visible before we leave the shift. Or let's write them down on a board as soon as they happen so we're not relying on memory. What we're doing here is we're strengthening the trigger and you're not absorbing the task, okay? Now, whilst this might be a little bit of work in the short term, long term, this is what gives you freedom. This is what allows you to step away from the practice, and this is what allows you to have a team that's actually doing work while you don't have to be there micromanaging or hovering, okay? Let's look at another example here. In this situation, let's look at stock ordering. So you notice that the pillows are all gone. Again, the old reflex will be, I'm just going to order these myself. The new reflex, remember, is to pause and then inquire. So instead of, why didn't these pillows get ordered? You're going to notice or say something like this: I notice we're out of pillow. Can you walk me through our current stock check routine? Again, what we're doing here is we're mapping the system. Now, if the response is, oh, I thought you were still keeping an eye on that, you might follow up with, okay, who do we want to own this going forwards? And when exactly should we track for that to happen? What's the reorder point that we're agreeing on? Now what you're doing is you're making ownership explicit. In this situation, the signal was unclear ownership. And instead of placing the order yourself, you close the loop with clarity. So again, with this situation, we would reinforce that every Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll check the stock. If the pillows are less than 4, then you're going to reorder and bring them back to 10. Let's add that to the weekly checklist so it's visible. This is calm. This is specific. This is documented. You didn't micromanage and you didn't rescue. What you did is you reinforced structure, and that's really important, okay? Now, it is also important to realize that this is not going to transform your practice overnight, okay? But within 3 to 6, maybe 9 months, things are going to shift in a profound way. You're going to notice that your mental load starts to reduce. You're going to stop scanning constantly. You're going to stop carrying loads or micro decisions. Your team is going to grow. They're going to think before things escalate, and they're going to solve problems before asking you, okay? Now, what this is going to feel like to you is that problems are going to start to feel informational, not emotional, and growth is going to feel way safer. That's fantastic. Hiring will feel lighter, and eventually you can step away. That's freedom. Now, this is not because nothing will ever go wrong, but because structure is going to hold even when you're not there. All right. Let's close all this up. We've been solving the problem of no time, not by doing more, but by leading differently, okay? Now, if you take one thing from today's episode, please let it be this. Pause, run the filter, diagnose the signal, and then reinforce the structure. Do that consistently, and the practice is going to stop pulling back to you, okay? Stop pulling you back to the center. Now, next week, we're going to go a little deeper on this same theme, because when structure truly gets tested is when something genuinely does go wrong, a complaint, a mistake, a breakdown, because these will happen. And how you respond in those moments determines whether you regress or whether you continue to mature as a leader. All right, folks, thanks for all that you do. Keep saving lives, and I'll see you back here next week. Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer Program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.